Good morning, everyone. First of all, on behalf of Minister Kieran Cannon, who was originally billed to speak this morning, just his apologies. We had some interesting political moments here last week, and one of the consequences of that is he's been required to travel today, so he's asked me to speak in his place. But actually, personally, I was actually quite pleased that I could come here to be with you. Because this is a very important discussion on resilience, hunger and poverty, and it's also great to have the privilege of launching the 2017 Global Hunger Index. I was struck coming in here, I thought it was actually for the Irish people in the room maybe, there was something very, very appropriate about having a resilience event in a place that every year breaks the hearts of 31 counties out of 32. And most of those 31 counties have experienced the poverty of success. More often than the joy of it. The hunger that's manifest here every September is something which, if you've never been here, I would commend you, even if you don't like sport. There's something really important about the tribal expression that this place is home to. But enough of petty Irish stuff. Global hunger, much more important. The Global Hunger Index guides us in the fight against hunger worldwide, and in showing how many people face food shortages or even starvation, it is a reminder of the urgency of the problem and the need for a response, not just on a humanitarian level, although this is essential, but to continue to tackle the root causes of hunger. Hunger in many ways defines the island of Ireland. Our former President, Mary McAleese, said, I think it was in an inaugurational speech, we are a vibrant first world country, but we have a humbling third world memory. And I think it's important that we don't forget from where we came. The Great Famine of the 1840s, which wasn't the only famine we experienced on this island in the 19th century, saw 1 million people dead and around another million people emigrate in around a 4-year period. And that was about a quarter of the population of the island at the time. And that population decline continued until the 1960s, so it lasted for about 140 years. And even now, the population of Ireland hasn't recovered to the level of 1840. So unusually in Europe, our population is lower than it was 200 years ago. I don't think there's another European country that you can say that about. And just to put that in perspective, in 1841, the population of England and Wales, and we were part of the same country at that stage, was 16 million. And the population of the island of Ireland was 8.2 million. So we were half the population of England and Wales in the 1840s. And today, England alone is 56 million people. And on this island, north and south, we are 6.6. So that impact, it resonates now, when the actual things that happened are long lost, in real memory, but the impact resonates through the generations. And partly the reason for that was our famine changed our family structures. After the famine, people put off marriage until much later, with men marrying often only when they inherited the family farm, so maybe in their 50s, even sometimes their 60s. Celibacy, sometimes through joining religious orders, but often just through prolonged bachelorhood, became increasingly common, with those wishing to avoid the single life often forced to emigrate. We had this tradition called the American Wake, with families marking the departure of a loved one to the US, just like they did a death, as it was almost certain they wouldn't see they're departed again. And I think when we talk about resilience, there's something about those long-term effects of shocks like a famine that impact on resilience, not just in the moment, but down through generations, and the psychological damage, which is heritable, that happens when something really profound happens, needs long-term response. Of course, emigration does have its blessings, which is important, I think, to remember as the migration debate has taken on perhaps a security dimension in Europe, with those who left accessing opportunities they could not have got at home. Remittances were an important part of Ireland's national accounts until the 1950s, just as they are for many countries today, and indeed exceed development aid in many places. But we must also remember that not every migrant has a success story. Many experience heartache and despair, the pain of separation, scars that pass on to the next generations. Famine too changed patterns of land use on this island, creating in large part the landscape we have today. Arguably also, the aftershocks of famine contributed to the Home Rule movement and subsequent political convulsions, even revolution, which also led to today's political map. So, arguably today's Ireland is haunted by what the writer Speranza, who was the mother of Oscar Wilde, who some of you may have heard of, described as ghastly spectral figures. These were the survivors of the famine. And there's a sculpture of them on the quays in Dublin about a mile away, looking, it seems, for a migrant boat. So that's part of who we are. And I think it's really important when we think about Ireland's development cooperation policy that we remember from where we came and why we have a responsibility. And as we look across our planet, hunger does continue to cast its ghastly spectre. It scars people, societies and countries today, just as the famine scarred us. And we were helped by others too in our moment of need. Famously, the Choctaw Indians from North America, who themselves had a very moving story of deprivation and death in around the 1815, 1817 period, were amongst those who came to Ireland's aid. There's a plaque remembering their generosity in our Mansion House, which is where our Lord Mayor resides. It's also, interestingly, where our first Parliament sat. And that plaque reads, "Their humanity calls us to remember the millions of human beings throughout our world today who die of hunger and hunger-related illness in a world of plenty." Of course, remembering's all very fine, but actually the important thing is to act. And we must do so. Without action, without urgency, the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger by 2030 will not be met. Without action, without urgency, many millions of lives, and each one of those lives is a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a parent, a cousin, a brother, a sister, will be lost or otherwise blighted. And we must respond in that spirit of humanity demonstrated to us by our Choctaw family in our moment of need. And that's why it's really important that we get the compelling data which captures hunger at its most manifest, that's within the Global Hunger Index. It's a guide to our decision making, and I hope it's a similar guide to your decision making in your organisations. And it is really importantly a spur to action, and beyond the people in this room. 2017, and you alluded to this, Dominic, saw the first declaration of a famine by the UN in 6 years, that in South Sudan. But there were also pretty much famines, and we do talk of the 4 famines, maybe not officially, but together with South Sudan in Somalia, Yemen and Nigeria. And when we take them all together, they represent, according to the UN, the worst humanitarian crisis the world has seen since World War II. And that's really frightening. And this is the worst humanitarian crisis in 75 years. And it's happening at a time when there are other political crises and crises of confidence taking place as well. So there's a huge challenge which I don't think any of us underestimate. But we can get depressed. And I think it's important also that we recall that while we do have this terrible spectre of the 4 famines, that overall hunger in the world has decreased by about 27% since the year 2000. And that's thanks to the work of people in this room and many others. And we need to acknowledge that, because hope and remaining hopeful is really important to our own resilience as actors in this as well. But in reminding ourselves that progress has been made, we must also remember that that's scant comfort to those who remain in acute distress, and we must continue our efforts to address the causes of hunger. And those root causes include conflict, bad politics, and increasingly the stresses that emerge from a changing climate. But fundamentally, what the Global Hunger Index reminds us is that it's really all about inequality. And it is a fact that in some countries, famine hides behind what are otherwise encouraging national statistics. So how do we get beyond the data? Thriving economies coexist with pockets of extreme human deprivation. 60% of the world's hungry people are women and girls, which is great if you're a guy, I suppose, but 60%, we need to talk about that. And there are middle-income countries, and indeed some wealthy countries, which have regions which have levels of stunting that reach 70%. So hunger does discriminate, and it disproportionately affects certain ethnic groups, women and children, certain regions and religious groups, and it coexists alongside diseases of wealth like diabetes, obesity. So you can be hungry, and 100 miles away somebody can have diabetes and be dying of heart disease because they've been eating too much. Question for those of us who want to help is how can we best target our interventions across the differing political economies so that we can best help people grow or otherwise access food? How can we improve our understanding of the barriers that may prevent access to adequate nutrition? The index provides some of the guidance that we need to answer those questions. And Ireland is committed to being there to provide relief where it is needed and to also address the underlying structural causes driving hunger. Our Development Cooperation Programme has always had extreme poverty and preventing hunger at its heart. We try to target our support to those that need it most. And the index is very helpful to us in ensuring that our targeting is as good as we can get it. As we all know, we never quite get it right, but it's really important that we have data like the index to help us target as best we can. And we try to shape our programming to best reflect that focus. We try to leverage the knowledge and relationships that flow from our programming and through NGOs like yourselves that we work with to develop our advocacy bilaterally and in important fora such as the EU and the UN, the better to address hunger. I think we did this quite effectively a few years ago through the work of the Hunger Task Force and our follow-up. And I think one area where I think we can point to a specific contribution is on nutrition, which is arguably the most pro-poor area we work on. And we will meet the target of doubling our nutrition spend by 2020. And we've seen through our work and others with Scaling Up Nutrition, the Sun Movement, and our close collaboration with Alliance 2015 partners, and especially Concern Worldwide, a growing momentum on nutrition. It's finally getting the attention it deserves. But there is much more to be done. Our Taoiseach, that's our Deputy Foreign Minister, who's also our Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, announced a number of months ago that Ireland would have a new white paper on our development cooperation policy. And a key question which we need to explore in that paper will be how we might improve our response to hunger. How can we leverage the transformation in Irish agriculture, for example, from the famine 160, 170 years ago to a country that today produces 11 times more than we can eat ourselves? How can we better share that knowledge with those who need to travel that journey? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted that you're all here today in Ireland. The footprint of your respective agencies that you collectively represent is really significant. Your spend is about €1 billion, I believe, and you work with 50 million people across 87 countries. That you have to work across 87 countries is a reminder of the scale of the challenge in addressing things like hunger. But it's important that you're doing it. But also what you do is you represent all that is great about cross-European action and coordination. And that's a point that I think particularly resonates in a week where we've seen maybe a lot of cross people about Europe and maybe a lack of coordination. It's important that beyond the headlines, there's really good cooperation goes on across Europe on really important issues every day of the week. And in Ireland, we're really proud of the work that Concern Worldwide does with some of the poorest people on earth. But we also know that concern alone is not enough. The partnerships such as yours are vital to multiply impact and learning in a context of shared purpose. I look forward to hearing more about your deliberations and to using today's outcomes to inform our own thinking on future policy directions. I hope you have a good day's work. Thank you very much.